So I visited my campus this past week, and quite a few people were talking about the possibility of going online with their teaching post spring break, which is happening this upcoming week. And so while I usually post on Fridays, I thought I'd post this video early because I'm just going to go through some of the basics of using our LMS site. So we use a version of Sakai. So just kind of have some idea of how you can use various tools on the LMS when doing online types of activities and teaching, if that's going to be necessary or something you want to do. And so it's kind of it's a long tutorial, but it's quick in the sense that I go through each of the various tools that I use for the past 5 years pretty quickly and just give some basic overview of how they work. The most important tool that I recommend is Lessons, which I get to near the end of the video, but it uses other tools from earlier on in my explanation, which is why it's near the end. But if you want to skip to that, you can do so. All right, so I'm hoping this helps. I have some other videos and blog posts about digital teaching or digital assignments, and I'll link those below in the description box. Okay, so go ahead and let's get started. While I'm not going to do like an incredibly deep dive into this website, I do want to do at least a lot of the basics of the tools available just to give you a sense of what you can do online. And so this is ReggieNet, which is the IS2 system. It's a version of Sakai, but it's very similar, I would assume, to Blackboard or Canvas or those other options as well. So to start from the beginning, this is my unpublished class site because it's from an older semester. Obviously, you want to make sure yours is published if you haven't been using it yet. But basically, we have up here at the top right, sites, and you can the ones that are starred are going to appear in your toolbar. So make sure that you have the ones from your most recent semester starred so that they appear. Okay, and so as you can see, there are the options that I have starred, and I'm just here in one of my more recent classes. What you want to look at here first is your left toolbar. So these are all the tools that are available for this class. But if you go down to Site Info and then Manage Tools right here, here are all the tools that you can use, right? And then obviously if you do the check mark, it will appear on your toolbar. So once you know which ones you want, and they'll all appear here, so you can easily remove them too if you don't need them. Then you just click Continue, and it shows you all the ones you've selected, and then you say Finish, and now they'll all be on your toolbar. Now you can also do Tool Order, and on here you can organize what order the tools are in on your toolbar. So let's say you want to have the syllabus first, you can do that, right? And so you can just see what is most intuitive for you and your students. You move them around, and again you click Save, and then that order is now saved onto your toolbar. Okay, so that's just, again, there's obviously a lot of options here, but we're keeping it simple, right? So just manage the tools and then do the order the way you want it to be. So overview is very basic. It's just, for me, the description of my course, and then you can see if you have new messages or new posts in the forum. You can add announcements and they'll appear here. And so that's basically it. The syllabus tab, again, very simple. I've added, my syllabus, my course schedule, my email hours, and then my required reading list. So you can just do the syllabus if you haven't already. Announcements are just what they sound like, right? They're just, little announcements that you want to make to the class when you're not actually physically present. And so when you add them, the newest ones appear at the top and they'll appear in your overview. You can also, let's say, add one here. So obviously you name it and then you put something in the body. You can add attachments and all that. And then what you can do here is if you go here, you can add attachments there as well. You can say, yes, email all participants this announcement, right? Those who did not opt in, I wouldn't do that one. Either you send it to them via email if it's super important, or you don't email it to them because it's not an immediate need, right? So I only did this when I knew that they didn't have to turn anything in or do anything immediate. The next class period in class, I just mentioned, hey, if you haven't seen this announcement, make sure you do so. But obviously in this case, if you're going online, then I just say, always email them the new announcements, and then you post it. Okay, so these two are actually the tool called Lessons, which is down here. So I'll show you that in a second. It's my favorite tool on here, and probably the tool that you'll use the most. So Dropbox is exactly what it sounds like. It has an individual file for every single student in your course as well as for you. So I'm not going to scroll down here because you'll see my students' names, but only your student and you can see each Dropbox folder. So let's say your student is Jill and then you have Joe. Jill can see hers only, right? But you can see Jill and Joe's and all the other students. Joe can see Joe's only, but both Joe and you can access that folder. Okay, so the student only sees theirs, and you see all of your students and yours, and you could actually add things to your students, but they cannot add things to yours. Resources is just a way that you can add different folders of resources onto your class site. And again, that's very easy. So you can just go actions and you can create a folder. So for example, you can say, the folder is week 10, week 11, week 12, or you can do like I've done here. All the assignment sheets are in this folder. Post-spring break elements go here, pre-spring break elements go here, and that's attached. That's automatically tied to these two sections. Anything that I post there also appears in these folders, right? But you can create as many folders as you'd like, and obviously then you could add different files or web links or text documents, etc. Assignments. If you're not using this yet, it's my favorite way of using assignments because I keep all my assignments digital rather than in paper copy, and I have a video about that, which I'll link in this video. But basically, you go here and you create various assignments and you tell them, when can they submit, when's the open date, when's the due date, right? And so on and so forth. So again, it's very simple. You just add and you give the assignment a title. Okay, you have to have instructions. What I do, since I have an instruction sheet, I just say, look at the PDF because you need to have something here. And then I attach the assignment sheet. And then you start putting in, again, the open date, the due date, when will you accept it until, right? And so this one's great because let's say the due date is, as you can see here, the 15th, but you accept it for another extra day, right? And you can say, as much as you like afterward, the time that it's due, etc. Okay. And then again, you can figure out if you want to send reminders or not. Okay, can they submit it in line, which means a text box, or does it have to be an attachment only, PDF, or can it be either? So I like just doing attachments only because it makes it much easier to just look at PDFs. Okay, and then grading scale, right? You click one. I use no grade because I just put the grades into the grade book rather than to the assignment tab here. Okay, and so there's a lot of different options here. For example, I do not add the assignment to the gradebook. I do that manually just because I prefer doing it on my own, but it is an option if you want to automatically add it to the gradebook. I think it's easier to do manually, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Okay, and you post, and now you have a new assignment there. Okay, so those are there. Okay. Forums, very useful for online teaching because you can create as many discussion forums as you like and your students could just submit there. Okay, so if you're going online, this is what you'll use for class discussions. Okay, so for example, here are, let me give you an example here. So this practice activity, I'm not going to click into it because you might see my students' names, but basically I had students get into groups and they analyzed, a short story called Midnights, right? And so in the forum, I described what they had to do in the description, okay? And so each of the students just added in, their group's response to this activity prompt. So what you can do is you can create a new forum. And so, for example, it can be, again, let's just give it a title. Maybe it's week 9, right? Because that's the next week. And then you can do a short description, these are the activities that occurred during the ninth week of class. And then in the description, you can have, whatever you want, obviously, the longer one. But for example, you might list out the different activities that happened on that week. And obviously, you can add them as you go along, or you could have them already when week 9 begins. Okay, if you have an assignment sheet that you want to add in, you can do so as well by adding an attachment. Okay, so something here for the forum posting, you can require users to post before reading. And so that means is the student can't read any other students' post without posting their own. So let's say you want them to analyze a certain text, then you can say, okay, here is the questions I want you to answer when analyzing this text. They write their post and they submit it, and then they can see their classmates' post as well. Until that point, they can't see them, even if students have already submitted them. So this is very helpful if you want to make sure that your students aren't just using their classmates' post to write their own. Okay, so this is one way to kind of prevent, not necessarily cheating, but copying or repeating their classmates' information without really doing all the work themselves. So this is a key element that you probably want to consider when you're doing, online activities this way. Maybe it's not necessary, but if it is, then it's something to consider. Okay. Now, when you do, you can just save it, but I would say save settings and add topic, because now you're in the week 9 forum and you could add different topics. So the topics are the different activities. Okay, so for example, let's do analysis of X book, right? And again, you can do a short description or a longer description of what exactly it is you want them to do, right? So you just add in the directions. Okay, and again, I have required users to post before reading. We'll keep that simple. Okay, so you can just, if you only have one activity for that week, you could just save. But again, you can save settings and add a different topic. And so let's say for your Wednesday's class, they're doing a discussion, right? So maybe what you have them do is, answer one of the following questions, then respond to 3 of your classmates' answers. Okay, and maybe you give them a word minimum length requirement, or the case may be, right? And then you add in the questions. Okay, in this case, obviously, you can't, or I guess you can. You can require them to post their answer first. Okay, but you can take that off too if you don't want to do it that way. Okay, and then again, save settings and add topic. And now one more activity for the week. So you have the analysis of a text, then you have a Q&A regarding the text, and so maybe you have a, wrap up reflection. And so you ask students to, kind of do a reflection of what they've learned from the text, what new ideas came up from their classmates that they're not integrating, whatever the case may be, right? It can just be an activity that you give directions to. Okay, so then let's save that one. And now you'll see here that the 3 activities are now under week 9. Now that you have the new forum, right, you'll notice that the activities are in the order that you added them. So analysis, discussion, wrap up. Let's say you want it to be in the reverse order, so it's more natural to see how they got from analysis to wrapping up. You just click organize here at the top, and then you can say, I want the analysis first, then the discussion, and then the wrap up. You go down and save it, and now it's in the reverse order, okay? And then you can, view the description again, like I said here. But basically, now what students do, right, is they go ahead and click on the activity, okay? And then they could start a new conversation. They give it whatever title they want. So obviously they can just say, like, if they want to answer for Erica, right? And then they fill out their answer, or they add attachment. I suggest filling it out in the text box, because if not, your students have to open up each PDF individually, which can be a pain. So you answer the question, and then you post it. Okay, and so now under that activity, you can see who authored it, right? And then again, their response. So you can click it, you see this person's response, and now you can reply to theirs as a comment, right? And so your students could respond to their classmates' stuff. They click post, and now it appears right under, okay? And so students can reply to the original post or to a reply to that post, right? Depending on what they want to say to who, okay? So again, forums are your best friend for online activity creation. You can organize them again by week or by something completely different, right? So as you can see here, I just had a forum for small class activities and homework activities. I have my students do an analysis post, so I just have it by the book that we read. So really, it's up to you to decide that. Okay, so that's forums, probably one of the most important tools for online teaching. Polls can be used too, very simple. What should we do first is one question that I asked. Again, I won't go in here, but you can add some polls to get, some anonymous data. You can't track who said what, so keep that in mind. Okay, so tests and quizzes, self-explanatory. You can create your quizzes or tests or assessments or activities on here. Very simple. You just add, give it a title. Let's say it's a reading quiz for that book. Create it. And then you have all types of questions that you can be asking here. So let's say it's multiple choice. Okay, you can give it a point system. So maybe the answer is worth 1 point. Okay, is there a single correct answer or multiple? You ask the question here. You say the answers are this or that or this or that. And then you tell the system what the correct answer is. Okay, and then if you want to give feedback, right, you can do that. Save it. And then move on to the next type of question. Okay, so if you have multiple choice and you say what the correct answer is, the system will grade it for you, and then you can just say add to the grade book. So that can be very easy, but also you can also do short answers, fill in the blank, whatever it is you want. So you're just building a test basically, right? You can change the order of the questions, whatever the case may be. Okay, and then you go to settings once you have all the questions in there, and you can figure out, when is it available, when is it due, do you accept late submissions, all these questions that you can answer, right? And then you save the settings and publish it. So again, I'm not going to dive too deeply into it, but it is a simple way of creating activities as well. The gradebook, obviously, if you're not using this already, I'm not sure why you would start now, but obviously it is an option. I'm going to just put here my name so that I make sure that no students are showing here. Okay, so as you can see here, I have my various assignments added here. Okay, and my projects are actually weighted grading. So for example, when you have I have a group project where they have to create their own analysis activity and lead their students through it, and I have a blog post about that, which I'll link below, as well as a video on how I design my group projects. But as you can see here, it's a 3-part project. They have to create written materials, lead the activity, and then reflect on leading the activity. And so while each of them are worth 100 points, I just do regular, 100-point grading. If you go a little further out, I weigh them differently. So the written material is worth 50% of their grade, the leading activity is worth 40, and the reflection is worth 10. But I can't change that option in the grade book. So what I do there is I just put in the grades for those individual activities, elements of the activity, but then I do the weighted grading on my own with my calculator, right? And then I put here under project grade that weighted grade, right? Because what you can do is you can click here and you can say, edit item details, and you can release the grades so students can see it. And then I can say include item in course grade calculations, right? In the group project category, it's worth 100 points. And so what works well there is the individual elements grades, I don't include them. So they don't go towards the grade that's being calculated in the grade book. Instead, once I release this project grade, only that grade appears as the official group project grade that's included in the grade book. So that's how I make sure that I do weighted grading, but since the grade book doesn't do that naturally anymore, I just give the overall grade once it's already weighted by me using a calculator. So that's one way of doing weighted grading in the grade book. But again, I'm not sure if you start using this midway through the semester, but if you're considering it for next semester, I do think it's very helpful. And again, you can just, go to the settings of the grade book, and you can just say, I want to have categories. I want them to be weighted, though I don't know why it asked that because it's never working properly anymore. But you can have here, okay, these different assignments or units or projects, and then how much are they worth? What percent of the grade are they worth? Okay. And what I like here too is, so my students do literary analysis post, and it's worth 15% of their overall grade, but there's multiple posts that they can do, but they're only required to do 3, right? Because each is worth 5% of their grade. So I say here, keep the 3 highest. No matter if they turn in 5, only use the 3 highest towards their grade, so you can kind of say how many of them do you actually want to be going towards the overall course grade. So that's a pretty cool option here. And then you save changes. It has to equal 100%, so you make sure you do that properly, right? So you do that in settings, and then, you just have the grades here. That's the grade book. But now we can get to my favorite tool here, which is lessons. These other ones I don't use much. Again, site info just for managing my tools and adding them. Statistics, you can kind of get a sense of how often students are using different elements of your site. It's a bit too big brother for me. But lessons is fantastic. This is my go-to tool, and it's how I created these 2 tabs. So what do you do here? To keep it simple, you go to more tools, and you say, I want to add more pages. Okay, so the page will appear on your toolbar. So let's say, for example, again, you can do this by weeks. So let's say week 9. Okay, and then save. Now you'll see here week 9. And again, if you go to site info and manage tools and then tool order, you can put this week 9 further up. Okay, but now you go to week 9 and you're going to add content to it. So for example, you're going to say add text. It's already called week 9, so maybe the day that you're teaching. All right, so Monday, you can change the font size. Let's say go to 20, the font type, all that kind of stuff. Right, so Monday, and then you can say whatever you want here. So potentially, activity 1. And you can say, first, I want you to do this analysis of this assignment, of this reading, right? So do the analysis, and then you give the directions. Okay, and maybe you have a second activity. Second activity is to respond to a classmate's, right, analysis. You can give deadlines. I'll adjust. You're basically describing what you want to happen on that day if obviously you're doing it at home rather than in class. And then you save it, and it pops up here. Okay, and then you can continue adding content, right? You could add more text, but then you can do other things as well. You can add content links is a major one. Okay, so for example, let's say that you have this analysis of a short story, and then you also want them to respond to someone else's analysis. What you can do is you can add a content link, and if you have a URL to that story, you can just add it here. So I don't have this off the top of my head, but I'll just put my website, right? And then you have the item name, so the short story name, and you save it. So now they can click this and it takes them to that website. So in this case, it'd be the short story, but what you'd see here instead would be my website, so I'm not going to show that, right? And so you can add as many web links as you want, but then you can also say, okay, I'm going to link to a forum or a topic. So here is the analysis activity that you created in that forum earlier. You selected item. Now, if they click this, it goes straight to the forum post. Okay, so click it, and it takes you to analysis. They can read the full description, and then go ahead and start a new conversation. Right? So you can add links this way. It makes it very easy because they can just go to the week 9 tab, and everything is here from there. Right? They don't have to go to resources to find that short story link. You just linked it right here. They don't have to go to the forums. Where are forums? Right? You don't have to go to forums. You can just go right here. Okay? You can edit if you need to edit what you already wrote. You can do that. If you go here, you can add a short description of the web link, right? Or of the forum post. So this is the tool to use. Okay, you can also, for example, if you have a certain a checklist, right? So you might want to tell them, here's the order in which to do these things. You can add that. Okay, if you go up, where is link to an assignment? Okay, so let's say you create an assignment under the assignment tab. You select it, and then you selected item, and it'll appear there as well. All right, so this is where you want to explore. I'll show you the one that I actually created when I taught this course. So this was all the weeks pre-spring break. Okay, I had moved this up later, but I had here explaining how it worked, because what I did is I actually had their homework included here. So let's say week 1, I gave them the dates that I taught. So Tuesday, I'd say your homework for Tuesday night leading up to Thursday is this, right? Complete this, watch this, answer this. And then I linked what I could here. Thursday, here's your homework for over the weekend, read these, additional instructions will be listed below, right? And so I have the links again to what they're reading, what they're watching. Week 2, again, homework for each day. And then as I see here, right? So here's the assignment link. Here's the reading that they did. Here's the form that they had to fill out, right? And here's another link to that video, okay? And so you can just go through and have just one page if you want for, multiple weeks. Or like I mentioned here, you can just create a week by week, approach if you want to keep it simple, especially if you're having a lot of different activities each week. It might be easier to separate them by weeks rather than like I did here, pre and post spring break. Okay, but definitely the one you want to do. And so again, that's called lessons in the Sakai version here. So you just go to lessons one more time. More tools is first because you want to add a page, because that page will then be included in the toolbar. Okay, so that's basically Sakai basically in a nutshell. Now if you go to site info again and then manage tools, there are some tools I do not use, as you can see. And so for example, if you want them to do almost like their own blog, you can add that to the site as well. I never use a calendar because we met in person, but you can add the calendar so that there's deadlines are easy to see in one place. Chat rooms I've used as well. So this could be good for online conversations that are live, right? And so I'll just go ahead and click continue there so I can make sure those were added. And remember, tool orders where you go to organize these. So for example, you can move your lessons up that you're creating so that students could see it really easily. Okay, these are the ones I just made. We'll save that. Okay, so calendar obviously is very simple. You just add different events and they will appear in the calendar so students could see when things are due or what's happening, etc. in one page. The blog works like a blog, right? So they can add a blog entry. They can give it a title. So for example, if you want them to respond to current events in some way, you can say, hey, this is what I want you to do. And they can go here and give it a title. So Erica's response to, I don't know, the primaries, right? Or to the campaigning. And then they can write out their blog post, right? And then they publish it. And so now you can see that blog, right? And then an add blog entry again. And so obviously they can see that this is me. Once the students are adding blogs, they'll see who wrote which blog, right? People can leave a comment, right? You can edit it after you wrote it if you need to. It's very simple. It's just basically a, one blog for all of your students and yourself. And then finally the chat room. So this can be good because it happens, synchronously rather than asynchronously. So for example, you can go ahead, if you go to options, you can add a room. So you can do a date or you can do a subject. So maybe it's going to be, March 15th, right? If that's the day you teach. And then you can do a short description if you want to. Okay. So show how many of the last messages. I'd bring this number up quite a bit, considering it's going to be potentially a large discussion. Okay. You can have a start and end date or time when they're allowed to chat in it. So now let's say you go to here and you go ahead and begin the chat. So for example, you could have, hey everyone, let's start discussing this week's or today's readings. Let's start with this question. And then you insert the question, add a message, and now it pops up. And then your students could start answering, right? So, here's Joe saying this, here's Jill saying that, and so on and so forth. So obviously this can be hard for students to keep up if the conversation is going very quickly. But if you only have, smaller class size, that can work well. If not, you can just say, have patience. You can see, as I put here, 50 comments below, when you're doing it, so they can just read more slowly. You can also have breaks when you say, answer this question, and then, once you have a lot of answers, okay, stop, read through the answers for the next 30 seconds or a minute. And then once you wait that time, okay, now let's do this, right? So you can kind of add in breaks so people can read if you want to. You can also tell them, make sure you say, at Erica if you're responding to somebody's comment, right? And then you can do it that way too to make it easier for people to see if they're responding to a specific person. Okay, and so again, if you say change room, you can see all the chat rooms that you've created. So maybe you don't want to do it by one date, but you can say, okay, on the 15th, we're discussing book A, B, and C, or fairy tale A, B, and C. You can create a chat room for each of these fairy tales, right? And you can say, okay, for the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you 10 students go to fairy tale A, you 10 students do B, you 10 students do C, and answer this question. And so you can moderate the 3 different chat rooms, but since there's only 10 students, it's much easier for them to keep track of who's saying what, and you can just kind of move in between the 3 and chime in yourself.
And you can say, okay, stop. Now go to chat room, for fairy tale B, and this group go to C, and this group go to A. You can read through the ones you see already. Okay, now I want you to answer this question about this fairy tale. And then again, the discussion continues. So chat rooms can be really great, but I do suggest potentially splitting up by topic so you can have fewer students in each chat room at a time, which makes it easier for them to read. Okay, but what's very important is that when you create the chat room, again, let's say this one, add another chat room, you want to say how many messages they can see. Okay, so show all of them or show the last X. You want that number to be high because you obviously probably get a lot of comments during this activity. Okay, so that's definitely one I think you should add for this kind of online teaching that's all of a sudden, right? Because I think it'd be helpful to have ones that are live, not just ones that are in the forums. I'm going to end this kind of tutorial, like a really fast tutorial here. So hopefully that was helpful. And again, if you have any questions, you can let me know.
I hope that was helpful. Like I said, I'll have various links below to different blog posts or videos that I think could also be helpful. Obviously, you can check the campus's actual university tips and tutorials for using the LMS site. And then this Friday, which is my usual posting time, I'll go ahead and do a video on different types of tools you can use outside of LMS for online teaching. So I'll see you then.